not just any Mustang. This is a GT350. So it's a pretty big job that we're doing. If you are watching this, there's a good chance you've actually seen my other oil pump gear video that I did on my buddy Daniel's car. That was just the 2014 Mustang GT. The 2015 and up Mustangs have different firing orders, so the whole timing chain procedure changes on those cars, and this being a GT350 also has a unique timing chain procedure. And I do have, very specific Ford torque settings for all the different bolts and the timing procedure for the chains and everything like that. So I wanted to make sure I had all of that before going into this job, because it is a very high-end car to some extent. So I wanted to be extremely precise with everything that I do, because we don't want to make any mistakes to begin with, obviously, let alone have something go wrong with a car like this, because that's not in the budget. But that being said, I definitely don't recommend this job if it's something that you are nervous about, are not confident in your mechanical skills, something you've never done before. I started off doing the oil pump gears on my own, but I also had a little bit of time to kind of work up to that confidence level. It wasn't like something I just dove right into. So I definitely recommend, pumping the brakes a little bit. Make sure that you are confident enough to do this kind of thing before you try and take it on your own, or pay someone that, is professional or confident within their mechanical skills. I'm just an intermediate mechanic at the end of the day. I'm not a professional by any means, but this is something that's not unnecessarily over the top. So with that being said, I'm not going to show you guys every little step of the way. Pretty much just have to tear everything apart, get to the front of the timing stuff, pull the timing cover off the front of the motor and whatnot. And, to do all that, it takes some time. So we're going to probably skip most of that. I might give you little updates along the way. But once we are getting ready to start pull the valve covers, pull the timing cover, that kind of bigger, more in-depth stuff, that's where I'm going to start to show you more of what's going on, as well as, the timing procedure, and pulling all the timing chains. Stay tuned as we get real deep in the thick of things with this GT350. Okay, so it's probably been about 2 hours or so. I've done lots of disassembly. I had to pull the battery, the cover thingy that is like a shield, I guess. There's a brace that goes over the top, but it just bolts to the back of the firewall. And then I was able to kind of get better access to everything for the valve covers, which you can see are now off. The cams are now exposed. The driver's side, you always want to be particular and pay more attention to, because it has the dipstick, right? So as you can see on the valve cover here, the dipstick sticks out pretty far from the valve cover. So you got to be careful, because this is pretty easy to break. It's just like plastic welded or something. But there we have it. Here's my working table, right? I have everything kind of laid out, trying to keep it all nice and organized. But now that we're at this point, I do need to go underneath the car, and I'm going to drain the oil and the coolant, kind of get that all out of the car, so that we can start working on pulling the timing cover and getting into the deeper part of the motor. Before you do all that, you got to drop the fluids, because otherwise it's going to be a heckin' mess. So this front middle splitter section right here, you have to remove that so that you can pull the under panel all the way off, that massive thing. There's tons of bolts and whatnot, because to drain the radiator, you got to move that thing out of the way. And to get this off, you really just have to yank on it really hard and try and push down on the top side at the same time. That's what I found kind of worked best to get this to pop out. So anybody that's doing headers or anything along those lines, you have to remove the under panel. It's a little bit of a lengthy process, takes more time than it's worth. So, but now that that's out of the way, we can drain the oil. And being that this is an 18, I don't know if the 15 to 17 GT350s have it or not, but it's got that plastic oil pan with the little plastic drain plug, which I think is a terrible design. I don't know why they do it, but they do. I always make it a habit of, when doing oil pump gears, to just do fresh oil and fresh coolant, because that way you get nice, good stuff going through the motor and everything. But we're gonna go ahead and do that and get those fluids draining. All right, so it's a fair bit later. I got the oil and coolant drained out of the motor now, and I've been slowly going through and removing everything off of the timing cover, like the water pump, all the pulleys and all that stuff, alternator, everything like that. All the water pump bolts are out now, so the water pump's ready to pull. I just wanted to crack the crank pulley bolt first. The way I do that is I zip tie the crank pulley so that when it rotates, it gets a little bit of resistance, and you just do that right to the sway bar. This is now loose, so this bolt can come out. But before I actually pull the crank pulley off, I'll pull the water pump, which is going to be messy. If you guys have never pulled a water pump before, it's always quite a show. So I'll do that real quick. Oh, here's to hoping my pan is placed well. Oh God. I hate pulling water pumps. Shit goes everywhere. So that's the box the harmonic balancer comes in. Just to give you guys a better idea what I was talking about. Here's the whole piece or whatever. This is the rod that was in it. I actually did not get the balancer off just now. I'm gonna have to switch to the longer rod. So that was the medium rod. So it's just a little bit too short. So I'm gonna have to back this all the way out and then go from there. Okay. Coolant and shit on it. I'm gonna clean that up, but there we go. Harmonic balancer is now off the car. Alright guys, so with everything out of the way and the only thing stopping the timing cover from coming off being the timing cover bolts, we're gonna now start loosening all those, but I wanted to show you kind of how I go about this just because I think it's a good idea and it has always done well for me. So I typically find a piece of cardboard that I can kind of draw out the shape of the block, and as you can see, I've already got this bolt here kind of attached. So what I do is I just poke it through in the position that it came off of the block. So this is the very bottom left where the oil pan meets the block. As I pull them all off, I just stab them in the the cardboard so that when I go to put everything back together, I know exactly where every bolt came from because it makes it super easy, and that way you don't have to worry about trying to remember what was where. And so I'll show you kind of how it looks when I'm all done pulling the timing cover bolts. Alright, so all the bolts are out. Show you my little schematic here. So as you can see, I got them all lined out based on where they came out of. Keeps it real easy when putting it back together. And with that, the timing cover should pop right off. Operative word being should. There's a little bit of like RTV silicone that gets put on the block during assembly in a couple different places. Just based on where everything bolts together, like the heads and the block and whatnot. Okay, there we go. Bam, timing cover. Alright, so I got the two gaskets back into the timing cover, just for reference purposes. This is going to be getting all brand new gaskets anyways, just because. Can't hurt while we're in here. But here we have the fully exposed timing chain setup of the block. So now we are in deep. Sorry, the thermostat housing is there. So now what I do is I use the crank pulley bolt, the old one, and put that back into the crank because that is how I turn the crankshaft. Since I don't actually have like one of those fancy tools or whatever. I'm looking to get one, I just haven't yet. But this works well enough. So from this, we can put this back in and then we'll be able to rotate the crankshaft until we are at the proper starting position for removing the timing chains off the motor. So I went ahead and took the time and pulled the water neck thermostat housing off so that you guys get the best view. This way, you can see what all is going on as best as possible. Alright, so as per the Ford instructions for the Voodoo, you want to get the crankshaft keyway to about the 930 position, which is where it is currently sitting, so that you have the right hand timing mark on the camshaft up top. And then you start by pulling off the timing tensioner bolts. So you always start with the furthest out timing chain. And so crack that bolt on the tensioner. And so I'm going to pull this one all the way out. And then what I do is I'll go to the other bolt, and when I crack that, it will allow that primary tensioner to then kind of release from the chain without come flying off. So as I crack this one, it should kind of spin on its own. Yep. And that's just what I do to kind of keep the tensioner from, going crazy and flying off or whatever. It makes it a lot more easy to pull off. And now the primary tensioner is off. So we can take these two bolts and I'll set them on the table over here. So with that primary tensioner off, should be able to pull this tensioner guide off. Yep, easy peasy. And then one bolt on the guide, also 10 millimeter. And let that bolt's off, this should kind of come right off. There we go, just to make a little bit of slack so that this guide can come off. Now with the guides and whatnot all off, this will just come right off. And what you see with these is they come with two colored links. There's a paint mark on there, but the link itself is also like a blue or brown color. They're both different colors. There you go, primary. And now that we have that chain off, we can move on to rotating the crankshaft to the next position. Alright, so per the Ford service manual, it says to rotate the keyway to the 1230 position. You can hear all the air from the pistons and stuff compressing. I still have the spark plugs in. I didn't feel a need to pull them, but that looks right about there is 1230. Which makes sense because now the timing mark for the left side cams is right up top. And so the procedure is pretty much the same as the other side. I always start with like the left side bolt on the tensioner, so it lets it release a little easier, like I said. I rotated the crankshaft counterclockwise just a touch because what that does is it pulls the chain back around and creates a little slack on the side so that it's a little easier to pull the guide off. Alright, and that's how you uninstall the primary timing chains on the motor, so that now what we can do is move on to the oil pump. Alright, so all the bolts are off the oil pump now, and it should just kind of release. What I don't know is, because it's a different design, it's like this press-in thing. Unfortunate discovery. I probably should have paid more attention and looked further into this, but I do have to actually remove the oil pan to be able to pull the oil pump off of this car. It's the case with the 2018 and up Mustang GTs as well as the GT350s. It's just the design of the oil pump and the pickup tube. It's not like a bolt-in setup. The oil pickup tube is like part of the pan or something, I don't know, but it presses into the pump. So you can't really rotate the pump around to get it off of the pickup tube in this case. So, onto the oil pan. Alright, took some time, got all the bolts off of the pan, so this is just chilling now. As you can see, it's kind of floating around. But now, since I was able to drop that, the pump should come right off. There we go. And there we have our oil pump, oh god, which has got oil in it. So I'm going to put this down and then we'll move over to the table and I'll show you kind of how to swap the gears. So I went ahead and loosened all the bolts onto the back pump here. There we have our gears. These are boundary gears and crank sprocket. That's just what he wanted on the car. So that's what we're putting in. The main thing we're looking for is that they fit in nicely. Spin. So far, so good. These are all back in. I'm gonna go check what the torque setting is and getting it all torqued out. Alright, so pump's reassembled. I looked at the crankshaft. Here's the two flat spots for it. So I went ahead and got the flat spots on the gears so that it should slide right on if I lined it up well. go. I just need to bolt it down and torque it to spec. I gotta say, outside of having to drop the oil pan, it's kind of nice doing the oil pump gears on this car, or I guess even any 2018 Mustang GTs, because you don't gotta deal with the fucking pickup tube bolts, which are the worst. If you've ever done the oil pump gears on an 11 to 14 car, or even I guess 11 to 17, there's those two bolts on the pickup tube. Man, they suck. So A, B, C, D, and then you torque according to the factory. A is 89 inch-pound. All right. B is 18 foot-pound. There we go. C is the same 89 inch-pound. Go. And then D is 177 inch-pound. And then the last thing you do is you add degrees of rotation to it. 45 degrees on A, B is 75 degrees, C is 45 degrees, and then D is 60 degrees. We are now torqued back to spec on the oil pump. So from here, we'll start retiming the motor. So before putting this new gear on, I did take a quick second and compare it side by side with the old gear, and the keyway and the timing marks all line up on this one, so that's good. When working with the timing chains, you want to work with the colored links, right? So we've got one down here and then one at the top. So I'm going to line these up with the timing marks on the cams and crankshaft. So I'm probably going to have to get underneath the car to see the link on the other side. So as you can see, we have the timing mark on the crank sprocket there lined up with the primary timing chain. And if you come up top here, we have the same thing. Timing link is lined up on the camshaft timing mark. So now that we've done that, we can go ahead and reinstall our tensioner guide. And what I didn't show you was I used the vise and compressed the plunger. You move the little upper latch thing, I don't know, so you can compress the stop here. And once you compress it all the way, you can put in some sort of a pin. I just used a very thin Allen key, and then that you put in place, and it holds the plunger in place until you're ready to release it and put tension back on the timing chains. The torque specs for all the bolts on the timing chain assembly are all 89 inch-pounds. The timing marks are all in place. So at this point, you can now release tension onto the chain. Like so. Alright, everything looks good. Didn't look like the chain moved at all. Good practice is to double check the timing marks and make sure that it didn't skip a link or something. Ask me how I know. Yep, those are still good and lined up. So now we just repeat on the other side, but first you rotate the crankshaft from the 1230 position back to the 930 position where it started at, and then the rest is straightforward. Alright, so I've got the guide and tensioner back on as well as the primary. I haven't pulled the pin yet just because I want to double check the timing one more time, and you can see the links actually line up together on the timing mark right there. So everything looks good. This one's lined up over here, and then it's lined up over on the passenger side link as well, camshaft side. So with that being said, we will go ahead and pull the pin, and we should be all set. Come on, there we go. And then like I said, good practice, double check after you put tension. That looks good, as well as up top. on both sides. All right, so now that we have finished retiming the motor, I just have to, I would normally go into starting to put like the timing cover back on and whatnot, but being that it's the 350, like I was telling you, I gotta put the oil pan back up into place. So that's probably gonna take me some time, but I'll do that and then catch up with you guys at that point. So I just took about an hour or so and got all the gaskets swapped out. So new water pump gasket, thermostat housing, all the timing cover gaskets have been replaced, valve cover gaskets, all that stuff, cleaned up the old silicone. With that, we're now ready to go ahead and start putting everything back into the motor and dressing it all up, and I'll show you kind of like the position points where you got to put in fresh gasket, where the heads bolt to the block and the valve covers. Every time there's like a crease or a break in the metal, they have you put silicone there because it just kind of helps fully seal that little bit of break, because if not, you could potentially have a leak just based on design. And so let's put this thing back together and call it a day. With fresh surfaces and everything, I went ahead and did a quick wipe on all of it too. So now we're going to throw some silicone dabs on these 6 points that the block needs. Just nice little dabs. And then one on each side where the head meets the block. Unfortunately, the camera died there just now, but I didn't capture all that on camera. But everything's tightened back down, kind of going like a star pattern when you're doing all the tightening. Now that that's done, we can move on to the valve covers and then dressing up the front of the motor, and then we're pretty much wrapped up with the install. All right, now we are ready to mount our valve covers. Fresh silicone goes across where the timing cover meets the head. On both sides. Weary of any wiring and things of the sort, making sure that you don't get that underneath the valve cover. And just tighten down all the bolts. And that's that. Now just repeat on the other side. Alright, can't see it because camera angle, but I've just put the crank pulley back on, not all the way, just started it. And so this is the harmonic balancer installer tool. This has a couple different thread hitches on the end, which you match to whatever your crankshaft is. And then you have this little nut piece with like a bearing on the end that is essentially so you screw this all the way in until it's snug at the bottom of the threads. Use this, which slowly pushes the crank pulley back on as to not damage any threads in the crankshaft while installing it. So it makes things a little bit easier. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I did put some little bit of fresh silicone on the end of the crank pulley as well to seal against the crankshaft. So that was actually the first time I've ever used that tool. Don't be like me and try and figure out how to get the crank pulley on without it, because it's free to rent from AutoZone, and that literally took me like all of 2 minutes, I think. So next thing we're gonna do is install our crank pulley bolt, which you just need to lubricate up. So typically these are one-time torque to yield bolts. The old one you gotta throw away, or you can pick up the ARP one, which is the same across the Coyotes and the Voodoo motors. It's all the same thread pitch, so this bolt works on all of them. So we're gonna go ahead and lube up the threads, bottom of the washer, as well as the bottom of the head where it meets the washer. And then throw a little bit on the face of the crank pulley, and then we'll be good to go. And this just is a little bit of lubricant so that as you tighten down, you get a proper torque. So with the ARP instructions, you just need to torque it to 100 foot-pounds. And so to do that, typically when you're putting that much pressure on it, the crank pulley is probably going to rotate, not just the crank pulley itself, but like the entire rotating assembly motor. you're gonna turn it over.
So while editing this video, I realized that I didn't really clarify a good way to torque the crank pulley bolt. So when you've got a manual car, it's pretty easy to just throw the car in gear and then rip the e-brake, and that'll keep all of it from rotating because now the clutch is engaged, and yeah, it'll just keep it all nice and rock solid so you can get proper torque on that crank bolt.
Crank pulley is all torqued down, and now so I've got to put the AC belt back on, but I figured I'd give you guys a quick little rundown on how that works. So what you do is you tuck the belt behind the crank pulley here, pull it tight, and then you get it over on the AC compressor, and then what you do is throw some zip ties over on it so that you basically zip tie it down like so, and then as you rotate it, it'll stretch the belt until it pops into place on the crank pulley. All right, our 2 zip ties are in place. Just need to rotate the motor over, and this should do it. Yep, there we go. Bam, and just like that, we're pretty much done. I have like a few little things, and I still have more work to do on this car, but I'm gonna end the video here because that's pretty much all I wanted to share with you guys, was just give you a better understanding on what goes onto the oil pump gears or crank sprocket on a GT350, being that it is a bit of more of a high-end car and a little bit probably different than the other cars for like the Gen 2 and whatnot. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this, found it good information if it's something that you're interested in doing on your car, or just looking to get more background on what all it entails. So after the last thing I showed you, the rest is kind of pretty self-explanatory. I kind of skipped over just like I did in the beginning because most of it's relatively common sense. So if you're looking to tackle this job, I feel like it's stuff that you should already know. So that's why I didn't share every minor little detail. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video nonetheless, found it educational. Definitely hit the thumbs up button if you did, and feel free to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to stay tuned for more content like this. Otherwise, peace out. I'll catch you in the next one.